Welcome back. You're watching The Fix with me, Karima Brown. I'm in conversation with Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan on exactly what a recalibrated SAA will look like. Minister, there's been a lot of speculation about who the new partner for SAA will be. Some people are talking about Ethiopian Airlines. Others are suggesting that it might be people off the African continent. Can you take the country into your confidence and share with us who you have in mind and who has been, making inquiries about getting into a new recalibrated SAA?
I would certainly like to take the country into confidence, Karima, but we haven't reached the point where we can say X and Y are potential candidates for such partnerships. But let me say that there is a significant amount of interest in partnering with SAA on one kind of basis or another. Secondly, that we have had a number of what are called expressions of interest as we go forward. And thirdly, that in these complex negotiations, one requires transaction advisors, and so we're in the process of concluding the appointment of transaction advisors so that we have professionals who explore what kind of offers are on the table, what kinds of partnerships, financial and otherwise, are possible. But remember that our feedback from across the continent and elsewhere is that SAA is a very proud brand and very highly recognized brand. It has a very powerful safety record over the years. And so it is an asset worth being associated with in one form or another. So we'll certainly explore all of that. And once we are ready, we will certainly take the country into confidence.
Minister, you speak about SAA having a great reputation, but in South Africa, it is seen as a drain on the fiscus. It is seen in some instances as throwing good money after bad. Many have said, sell it and get rid of it and let the private sector take over. Why is it important from the government's perspective to have a national carrier? What is the rationale for it?
Well, there's two elements to it. Firstly, you have to, like I said, the first chapter that we have to close up is the old chapter. And in closing the old chapter, one has to pay the debt. So are those people who are arguing that case, which includes certain political formations, saying, don't pay the lenders? So even to liquidate SAA will cost us 20-odd billion rands for one reason or another. And it's a financial commitment that the owners of SAA, i.e. government, has to actually pay. So we've got to close that chapter and start the new chapter. Why do we need a new airline, and on what basis do we need the new airline? Clearly, what COVID-19 and the pandemic that is sweeping the world has taught us is that having a national capacity to actually airlift people, airlift cargo, have these chartered flights that actually bring back South Africans from all over the world is a capacity that is absolutely crucial. Secondly, we find ourselves at what is called the end of hemisphere destination, pretty much like New Zealand, Australia, and others as well. And of course, those two are very different examples of how they conduct their airline relationships. But tourism is a crucial part of our economy. It supports millions of jobs in South Africa and low-skilled jobs, which is an area that we need to have more jobs created in. And this kind of capability, both for trade purposes and tourism purposes, is absolutely crucial. But on what terms? Well, the terms that the government has made very clear is that firstly, we are willing to enter into partnerships with strategic equity partners. Secondly, we need to have a professional board. Thirdly, we need professional aviation managers. And fourthly, don't ask me or anybody else to go and run the airline. We're not aviation experts. We're merely stewards of what is an important asset in South Africa into the future, and an industry that needs to be supported to grow in many forms as well. And it is that new paradigm or new structure or framework within which we need to work that we'll have to get people used to at the end of the day. That a complex, narrow margin business like an airline business can't be handed over to a bunch of amateurs. And I think we need to bring on board the necessary skills from across the country, and if need be from outside the country, to train insiders in the country to run an effective airline.
Okay, Minister, let me come in here. You said you are interested in looking for equity partners, but what will the ratio be? Will the South African government still be the majority shareholder?
The government can have various permutations in terms of its equity participation. So if you take Telkom as an example, government has a 37% or somewhere around 35% of direct equity in Telkom. The PIC, I think, is the other entity that has a significant shareholding, which takes, if you like, the whole of the public sector, not necessarily government, into a 51% or 52% equity participation in Telkom. But Telkom is not a PFMA entity. Telkom is run independently by a board, and Telkom has its own independent qualified management to take the business into the future from a very complex past that it has also had, with old technologies dominating the past and new technologies dominating the future. So that's an interesting, if you like, model that we could actually look at as we go forward.
Now, of course, the question around ownership goes directly to the issue of state-owned companies. And sadly, as you well know, it doesn't have a good track record because it often tends to be monopolies. And monopolies, whether it is privately or publicly owned, often are uncompetitive. They sometimes have huge corruption. SAA's previous boards, you know, the less said about them, the better. How are you, as the shareholder, going to ensure that this bunch of professionals that you talk about is in their places and that you can't boss them around as the shareholder so that they can actually do their work?
Yeah, I think I'm the least of the problems. I think the major problem that we have and a major disease that the current economic system across the globe has is greed. And greed leads to the corruption that you actually referred to. And with people holding positions without integrity, that leads to all kinds of patronage that needs to be avoided. So even in the current environment, it is this factor that needs to have checks and balances put in place so that we don't have a repeat of the past. And we've got to get used to the idea that these must be professionally run businesses that achieves the objective that I set out at the beginning, which is a viable and sustainable and competitive airline that can stand on its own feet. It must create and save as many jobs as possible, and it must cut the dependence on the fiscus and do so in an orderly way. So I think in that sense, Karima, you would know that whether it's ratings agencies or other international commentators, they often say to us in South Africa, you've got to undertake structural reform. That applies to the telecommunications sector, it applies to the network industries, but it also applies to the state-owned entities, as you point out. And restructuring the aviation sector as far as the state is concerned and its involvement is concerned is an example of real hard work and nuts and bolts work, which is the practice of structural reform in some way. And that the lessons that we learn here must be applied to the ESCOMs, the PRASAs, and other institutions that we have under the control or with state participation.
Minister, just to cut you short,
Yeah.
I just wanted to tell you to get to the time frame because our time is running out and I want to get to ESCOM. In terms of this document that I have in my hand, it says, should the conditions of the restructuring not be fulfilled and the business rescue by the 22nd of July, the business rescue plan will be deemed not implementable and a meeting of creditors will be convened on the 24th of July for the creditors to consider amending the business rescue rescue plan, failing which the business rescue practitioners will be required to discharge the business rescue proceedings. So that's a very tight deadline. I mean, the 22nd is around the corner. Firstly, are you satisfied that the progress that you're making will allow you to stick and meet the deadlines that are set out in this, terms of reference and in this document? And that, of course, means a very firm answer from the Minister of Finance whether he's going to come to the party.
No, we've met most of the conditions of the business rescue plan, and there's no need for another creditors meeting as far as what I call conditions precedent in the business rescue plan are concerned. So that's part A. Part B is the employees' bit. And in that regard, remember, all of the hard work was done on a voluntary basis without Section 189 of the Labor Relations Act. And those who don't take up the voluntary offer, so to speak, will then be subject to the Section 189 notice, which is the bulk of that document. I haven't seen the document. It was brought to my attention last night. So I'm not sure which particular section you're referring to. Now,
it's page 10. It's page 10, Minister. The document is called, the contemplated restructuring and possible retrenchment. It's essentially just laying out the conditions. Minister, just quickly, in terms of the financing, a lot of reporters have said that Treasury isn't amenable. Sometimes we get mixed messages from the Finance Minister. You've been a Finance Minister. You've worn that hat. You know exactly what needs to go into considering putting 10-point-something billion rand at the disposal of SAA, considering its bad track record. Would you do it if you were Finance Minister?
No, as I said, Karima, these numbers can be very confusing. So much of that allocation that you're talking about is already in the appropriations insofar as repaying the lenders is concerned. So it's not new money you've got to find. It's been appropriated in February. It's there, and the fiscus and government has made the necessary arrangements to pay back that money. And of course, any finance minister would want to get the best possible outcome from any of these processes. But the key, Karima, is that this is not about finance ministers and other ministers. This is about one government having one policy in relation to one project, which is this airline, to shut it down in terms of its past and to start it anew on the basis of a new set of relationships, partnerships, and financial foundations as we go forward. And it's a great pity that sometimes very experienced journalists have bought into planted stories of one kind or another during what has been a very difficult 7-month period in navigating the business rescue process itself. But be that as it may, this is a government project run by government with one policy outlook in terms of what we want out of this process. And we're going to try the best that we can to achieve the successes we need to.
Minister, kudos to you for getting all the unions on board. It was an incredibly difficult process. I must say, I didn't give you much of a chance. So I think well done in terms of building that compact. But I can't let you go without asking you, obviously, about Eskom, simply because of its importance in terms of our energy supply, but also just the burden, again, on the fiscus. We've had load shedding. We are believed to be back on track now. There's been a lot of progress. You've stabilized with the leadership of Mr. De Ruyter, but you still have issues around connections, people who are not paying. A quick word just on your impressions of the progress made so far in terms of Eskom, and what can we expect, particularly during this lockdown? More load shedding?
Well, hopefully not. But, machineries or machines like power stations can have their own idiosyncrasies. But as far as Eskom is concerned, as you say, we've got a stable core leadership. We need to have more people around Mr. De Ruyter who have the experience and the boldness that is required to take Eskom forward. Secondly, the process of restructuring Eskom is on its way. We have the 3 divisions that have been created. Thirdly, we recognize that there is A lot more upskilling needs to happen within the power stations themselves, but that is a process that the new management team has started. And fourthly, the board of Eskom has been a bit depleted, so we want to, in the next few weeks, strengthen the board so that it has greater oversight of what is going to happen. And then lastly, we would want Eskom to provide a more reliable supply of electricity to the country and to the economy. And for that, we need the extra megawatts that we've been talking about to our partner and sister department, the energy department as well. And of course, renewables and other forms of energy in terms of the integrated resource plan will also come to the party as we go forward. So it's a long and tough journey as well, but I think we've made important strides.
All right, Minister of Public Enterprises there, Pravin Gordhan, speaking to us on Eskom and, of course, also SAA. Up next, breaking the taboo, how to talk about death and grief in a life-affirming way. Stay with us.